Good morning, everyone. This is Professor Remya Madan Gopal, and I'm going to take a topic that is very, very interesting for the day. That is related to environmental management and environmental studies, which go for both FY BCom students and SY BMS students. The topic for the discussion today is what we call and we regularly describe as the structural and functional unit of environment, that is the ecosystem. Now, when we discuss about ecosystem, let us first concentrate on the introduction. The term ecosystem is coined by the scientist Roy Calfam in the year 1930, and this particular concept of ecosystem was clarified in order to make our studies on behavior and interaction of biotic and abiotic organisms in the environment easier. Now, let us say what ecosystem is in simple words. Ecosystem in simple words is the sum total of all living and non-living components in the environment. Now, when we talk about living and non-living components, living components are also called as biotic components, and non-living components are also called as abiotic components. Both these components, they usually interact with each other, and this interaction is majorly based on two reasons. That is exchange of energy and flow of nutrients or materials. Now, why is this relevant? Now, let me tell you how this is relevant. Biotic and abiotic organisms, when they constantly interact with each other, which will help in maintaining the flow of energy as well as nutrients in the ecosystem, it forms the basis of life. Now, without this interaction, life will not exist. There will not be any living organism in the ecosystem. Hope these points are absolutely clear for you. Now, once we have gone through the basic idea of what ecosystem is, our focus should be on two major aspects of ecosystem. One, the structure of ecosystem. Second, the functions of ecosystem. Now, when we describe the structure and functions of ecosystem, we will get a clear idea as to how life exists and why is ecosystem said to be the structural and functional unit of environment. First, our focus will be on structure, where we will be discussing about the two major components of ecosystem, the biotic and abiotic components. Then we will focus on the functions, where we will be discussing about the flow of energy in ecosystem as well as nutrients in ecosystem that helps to sustain life in the world. When I talk about ecosystem, though it is a simple concept, it has very many complex layers of action for the survival of living organisms. Let us now just focus on simple ecosystem concept. Ecosystem can be as small as a puddle of water that are gathered during time of rainy seasons, or it can be as large as an ocean. It can be a small rock bottom where a plant is surviving from, or it can be the entire grassland or forest or desert. So here what I'm trying to say is the size of the ecosystem vary. There is constant variation. The only factor that we need to look into is if it supports life. If it is supporting life, definitely ecosystem can be small or big, does not matter. It is the basic component of environment. I hope this relevant point is absolutely clear to all of you. Now, our focus will be shifting into structure and functions of ecosystem. Now, let us turn our focus into the structure of ecosystem. This is one of the most important topics. We get the basics right, we get the concepts right. Now, when I discuss about ecosystem, like I told you, it is classified into two components, abiotic components, that are the non-living components, and the biotic components, which are the living components. Now, when I talk about abiotic components, it will include all natural all the natural components which are non-living in nature, such as air, water, land, soil, rocks, whatever that we see around us which are non-living, but at the same time very much needed for survival of any living organism. Okay. Now I am concentrating on only natural biotic components. Natural biotic components can be further subdivided into two: the physical or the climatic factors, which play a major role in survival of living organisms, as well as chemical or the edaphic factors, again equally important. Now when I talk about physical factors, this will include the rainfall, the sunlight, the temperature, the pressure, the humidity, everything that is around us, which provides the climatic atmosphere of life, or atmosphere in the climatic atmosphere in the biosphere. Now when I discuss about chemical components or edaphic factors, this particular factor deals with pH, minerals, various type of ion concentrations, and various chemical compounds that are seen in soil and other part of abiotic components. Okay, so the physical factors and the chemical factors, when both these factors coexist, they combinedly form abiotic components of ecosystem. These abiotic components in turn form the basis of living for biotic components. Now when we focus on biotic components, we classify them into three types. Okay. Now the first of the biotic components, what will that be? In simple words, we can say that they are the autotrophs. Now what are autotrophs? We will discuss one after the other. The second one is the heterotrophs, and the third one is the decomposers. Now when I am discussing three aspects of biotic components, that is the living components of environment, I first focus on autotrophs, then I'll come to heterotrophs, and then decomposers. Now the question arises, what are autotrophs? Autotrophs are organisms which are capable to produce their own food. Now who is capable to produce their own food in the ecosystem? We know there is only one example, that is green plants. Green plants can prepare their own food by the process called photosynthesis, where carbon dioxide and water reacts in presence of sunlight to form sugar, glucose, fructose, or any forms of sugar, and oxygen as a byproduct. Okay, so the process of photosynthesis done by green plants help in production of food, and since these organisms are able to prepare their own food, they are called as the autotrophs. Now what are heterotrophs? Heterotrophs are those organisms who cannot prepare their own food. Okay, they are completely dependent, directly or indirectly, on autotrophs so that they can survive. Now based on the feeding habits of heterotrophs, we further divide them into three. They are the herbivores, which are also called as the primary consumers. Then the carnivores, which are also called as the secondary consumers. And then the section of omnivores, which might be secondary or tertiary consumers. Now what are these three categories and why are they classified so? Like I told you, heterotrophs are basically classified on the food habits they live by. Herbivores are those organisms that are directly dependent on plants and plant products for their food. Any organism that directly depend on plant or plant products. Deer, giraffe, cow, grasshopper, anything that focus on its food from plants or plant products. Okay, they are the herbivores. Now, what are carnivores? In simple terms, carnivores are organisms that depend upon herbivores for their food. They are flesh-eating organisms. Herbivores are plant-eating, carnivores are flesh-eating. Now, what about omnivores? They are a combination of both. They eat plants and plant products. At the same time, they also feed on flesh. Human beings, cockroaches, types of rats, raccoons, bears are all coming under omnivores. Then, what about the examples for carnivores? Very simple. Lion, tiger, cat, dog, anything that are flesh eating will come under carnivores. Okay, since they directly depend on autotrophs for their, directly or indirectly depend on autotrophs for their food, the heterotrophs are also called as the consumers because they cannot prepare their own food through photosynthesis. Now the last aspect, decomposers. When I talk about decomposers, let me tell you, they are microorganisms that survive on soil. Now, why so much of importance given to microorganisms living in soil? Let me tell you why. Decomposers are those organisms that break down the dead parts of plants or animals in the soil. Now, when they break them down, what happens is they provide nutrients back to the soil. And these nutrients are again being reabsorbed by the plants. Now that is the role of decomposers. They not only provide nutrient supply to the soil, but they also give, let us say, survival or cyclic flow of nutrients between biotic and abiotic components. In addition to that, they also clean the environment, making them the most integral part of biotic components in an ecosystem. I hope the classification or the structure where ecosystem survives or exists is very much clear. Single most point should be the focus, the interaction between abiotic and biotic components. Though they are classified, all are interconnected with one another, then only there will be flow of energy and nutrients, which is the basis of life on ecosystem or the biosphere. Now, the branch of science that deals with the study of ecosystem is what we call as ecology. And it is this branch of science, which is multidisciplinary in nature, has given a clear-cut idea about the structure of ecosystem, which helps us understand more about the interaction between biotic and abiotic components. I hope the structure of ecosystem is very much clear. Now, we are done with the structure. We move on to the next important aspect of ecosystem, that is the functions. When I am going to discuss about the functions of ecosystem, we are going to majorly concentrate on few aspects. That is the energy flow in an ecosystem maintained by the functions. Second, the food chain and the food web, that is the very basis of life in the ecosystem. Third, the ecological pyramids that help us understand about how life exists in various levels. And the fourth and the final one, biogeochemical cycles. Now, these are the four aspects through which we will be able to explain the functions of ecosystem. Now, why focus on these four aspects? Because these four aspects cover the two major ingredients that are required for the interaction between biotic and abiotic components, that is energy flow and flow of nutrients. Okay. First, our concentration will be on energy flow. Now, what is energy flow and how is it relevant in an ecosystem is what we are going to focus on now. We all know that the ultimate source of energy for any ecosystem is the sun. So, solar energy is the ultimate source of energy for any living organisms. Now, what happens to this solar energy? Like I told you, the solar energy that is coming will be trapped by the green plants or the producers or the autotrophs, and these producers use the sunlight for the process of photosynthesis by which they produce their own food. Now, what is photosynthesis? Like I've already mentioned, it is a chemical reaction where water and carbon dioxide reacts in presence of sunlight and a pigment called chlorophyll, which is the green pigment seen in green plants, forming sugar, any sort of sugar products, as well as oxygen as a byproduct. Now, when the producers trap sunlight, they use it for photosynthesis and some of their major life activities. From the producers, the energy is transferred to the consumers because the food produced by the producers are used up or eaten by the consumers. Now, there is a catch here. When energy is transferred in the form of food that is being produced by the producers and it is transferred to the consumers, some amount of energy in every step is dissipated in the form of heat, as per law of thermodynamics. Whenever there is a chemical reaction, energy is either released or absorbed. So, heat energy here is released. So, in simple words, producers, when they transfer their energy to the consumers through the food they produced, some amount of energy is lost in the form of heat. So, consumers will never have same amount of energy as the producers. Now, from the consumers, it will move on to decomposers. Now, how it will move on to decomposers? The dead parts of plants and animals are broken down with the help of decomposers in the soil, and that is how decomposers get their energy. During these steps also, some amount of energy is lost in the form of heat. Heat is a common way by which energy is lost. Now, the decomposers act on the dead bodies of plants and animals, break them down in the soil and provide nutrient pool in the soil. This nutrient pool is in turn used up by the plants for their survival. Now, that is how energy is being transferred. Simple words. Let us just recap what we have discussed. Solar energy from the sun is being captured by the producers. These trapped energy, they use it for photosynthesis by which they produce their own food. Now, this food in the form of the energy in this food is transferred to the consumers when they consume the food produced, but some amount during this process is lost in the form of heat. Similarly, from the consumers and the producers, their dead and decayed parts go to the soil on which the decomposers act, releasing the nutrient pool. Nutrient pool is again reabsorbed by the plants for their growth and development. That is how the energy flow is maintained in an ecosystem. Now, like I told you, every step there will be some amount of heat lost. So, with that process, it's very much clear that maximal amount of energy will be with the producers, then the consumers, and the least with the decomposers, because in every step some amount of energy is lost. Now, it is said that in every step only 10% of the total energy is transferred from one organism to the other, which is called as the 10% rule, becomes very relevant when we discuss food chain and food web. I hope this concept is very much clear to everyone, where the energy is transferred from one organism to the other. That is sun moving to the producers, producers moving to the consumers, consumers to the decomposers, and finally back into the soil as nutrient pool, which are again reabsorbed by the plants for their life. So this forms one of the most important functions of ecosystem. Now, energy flow we have explained. We are going to move to the next important function, that is food chain and food web. Now these concepts are very much familiar to us, but I have to remind you, this is the basis of life on biosphere. Okay. Now what is food chain? This is a process by which energy is transferred from one organism to the other by the process of eating and being eaten. The organisms that are getting eaten are the prey. The organisms which are eating them are basically the predators. Okay. So when we describe food chain, it is a link of organisms through which energy is transferred in a series from one organism to the other, and it is always unidirectional in nature. Now I'll just provide an example of a food chain where we start with grass. Grass eaten by grasshopper. Grasshopper eaten by a frog. Frog eaten by a snake, and snake eaten by an eagle. It's just a simple example of a food chain. Now let me tell you, every level in a food chain is what we call as a trophic level. Now in this particular food chain that I have represented, we have got 5 different set of organisms, or 5 different levels, or 5 different trophic levels. Each organism represents a single trophic level. Grass is one, then comes grasshopper, frog, snake, and the 5th one is eagle. Now, when I talk about this chain of organism, we know that the process is simple: eating and being eaten. When grass is eaten by grasshopper, grasshopper get the energy, but some amount of energy is lost in the form of heat. That is, it is said that only 10% of energy is transferred. Similarly, when grasshopper is eaten by frog, only 10% of energy is transferred. Frog to snake and snake to eagle, the system continues. So for example, I'm taking for grass, the energy level is 10,000 joules. In grasshopper, it comes down to 1000 joules, 1000 joules. Frog, it's further reduced to 100 joules. Snake, it becomes 10 joules, and eagle, it becomes 1 joule. So in simple words, highest amount of energy is represented by the first trophic level, or the producers, because that forms the base of every food chain. Every food chain will start with a producer. Producer, the energy will be the highest. Herbivores next, then comes the carnivores. Okay. When I represent this food chain, in this food chain, producer is the grass, herbivore or the primary consumer is the grasshopper, carnivore or secondary consumer is the frog, tertiary consumer is the snake, and quaternary consumer is the eagle. Out of all these 5 organisms, the producers will always have the highest amount of energy, and the organisms that is seen at the last level of trophic level is the eagle, which will have least amount of energy, or any sort of secondary, tertiary or quaternary consumers will have minimum amount of energy, like I told you, 10%. Okay. Now this is a food chain in simple example. What we have to remember is, in an ecosystem, the food chain cannot, a single food chain cannot stand on its own. It is always interconnected. For example, the grass can be eaten by a butterfly. The butterfly can be eaten by a bird. Similarly, the grasshopper can be eaten directly by a bird. Frog can be eaten by a snake, and snake can be eaten by an owl. So what I'm trying to say is, the organisms in food chains are always interconnected because they cannot stand independent, and this interconnected food chain is what we term as food web. This food chain and food web concept is how energy is being transferred from one organism to the other, and the process is in simple terms of eating and being eaten. Remember, the energy level will be low as we go through the food chain, with maximum energy seen in the producers that forms the starting point of food chain. Now let us take a scenario or an example for which I say food chain is very important for survival of ecosystem. Just for example's sake, I am going to say that the entire frog species are being removed from the face of the earth. In the entire earth, there are no frogs existing. Let us look at the food chain and what will happen to the organisms in the food chain. There are grasshopper will be eating grass, but there are no frogs to feed on the grasshopper. By default, the number of grasshopper will increase. When grasshoppers number will increase, they will feed on more amount of grass and the amount of grass will go down. The balance is completely fumbled. Now, on the other side, snakes directly depend on frog for their food and the amount of frogs are decreasing. So what happens to the snakes? Their number by default will go down because they do not have food to feed on. When snakes go down in number, eagle will again go down in number because they don't have anything to feed on. So that in simple example, you can see by removing one particular species from a food chain, entire balance of ecosystem is disturbed. That is why I say the concept of food chain and food web is the single most factor that helps in maintenance of life in an equilibrium or in a steady state in any ecosystem possible. I hope the concept of energy flow, food chain and food web is clear. Now the next point that we need to discuss is ecological pyramids. Now before I get into ecological pyramids, let me tell you something. Ecological pyramids are nothing but graphical representations of any normal food chain. When I talk about ecological pyramids, they are of three types. They are represented by energy, number, as well as biomass. Now, these are the three concepts that we are now going to shift our focus on. Now, remember, when I discuss about functions, it is about movement of energy. And energy movement, we have seen it is through the help of photosynthesis, food chain, and food web that exists in the ecosystem for life to survive. Now, since we have discussed with energy flow, food chain and food web, our focus now goes to ecological pyramids. Ecological pyramids are nothing but the graphical representation of food chain and food web, which can be clearly explained based on three important aspects. One, ecological pyramid of energy. Second, ecological pyramid of numbers. And three, ecological pyramid of biomass. Now these are the three aspects through which I am going to explain ecological pyramids. First, and the single most focus, let us shift our concentration to pyramid of energy. Pyramid of energy is very simple to explain. I'm just going to draw a pyramid here, okay, and I'm going to classify them into various levels. When I talk about energy, I am going to represent in this pyramid a particular food chain which starts with grass, grasshopper, eaten by a rat and a snake. As we have already discussed, when energy is transferred from one organism to the other by the process of eating or being eaten, only 10% of energy is transferred. For example, agar grass ka 1000 joule hai, so grasshopper it will become 100 joule, rat it will become 10 and snake it will become 1 joule. So higher we go in an ecological pyramid, lower will be the energy. And this is one single most constant rule in ecological pyramid of energy. Okay, the pyramid will be always upright in nature because higher we go, lower will be the energy. Now let us shift our focus to numbers. A similar structure where I'll have grass, I'll have grasshopper, I'll have rats and snakes. We all know in simple terms how the number of these organisms exist. Grass, too many in number. Number is too high to count. Grasshopper, it is very high but lesser than the number of grass. Rats, high but lesser than grasshoppers. Snakes, high but lesser than rats. For example, there are, let us say, 50,000 number of grasses in the world. Grasshopper will be, let us say, 5,000. Rats will be, let us say, 1,000. And snakes will be, let us say, 100. It's very simple concept. Higher we go in pyramid of numbers, lower will be the numbers, because the base of ecological pyramids are always the producers. The energy and the number of producers are higher than any other organisms in an ecosystem. So both pyramid of energy and pyramid of number is always upright in nature. Now going on to the third aspect, the biomass. This was energy, this was number, and third one is biomass. Biomass again I am going to represent in a particular cycle where I have grass, grasshopper, rat and snake. Why I have given this particular diagram? I'll tell you. Biomass is the living weight of any organisms. It is the organic matter in an existing life of an organism. Okay. Now, when we talk about grass, we know the number of grass is comparatively way higher than snakes or any other organisms represented here. That means their living weight or their biomass is higher. So grass will have highest amount of biomass, followed by grasshopper, then rat and then snake. So here again, usually the pyramid of biomass is upright. Now I have used the term usually, that means there can be an exception. Now there are exceptions. And one such exception where pyramid of biomass is slightly different from energy and numbers is what I am going to explain next. Remember this point. Pyramid of energy, pyramid of biomass, always upright, because higher we go, lower will be the energy and lower will be the number. Pyramid of biomass is usually also upright. Higher we go, lower will be the biomass in usual cases. Now what are the exceptional cases in case of pyramid of biomass? There is one example that I am going to focus on, that is biomass in an aquatic system. Now when we talk about aquatic system, we know that there are water plants which are usually very small in nature, called as phytoplanktons. Their biomass is comparatively lesser than some of the zooplanktons or small animals which feed on these plants. Now these zooplanktons will be eaten by small fishes eaten by bigger fishes eaten by birds. This can be a particular cycle, but just remember, when I am discussing this particular set of food chain, the weight of phytoplanktons or the biomass of the phytoplanktons will be the bare minimum when compared to the tertiary consumer like bird. So in case of pyramid of biomass, in one such situation, which is the aquatic ecosystem, there is an exception where I'll tell you the pyramid of energy is inverted in nature. Now what do you mean by inverted pyramid? Usually the pyramid is drawn straight. In inverted pyramid, the pyramid is drawn in the opposite way, where the plants or the phytoplanktons are at the lowest level, then the zooplanktons or the small animals which feed on the plants, water plants that is, then the small fishes, then the large fishes and the large birds. Higher we go, higher is what we call as the biomass. I hope the concept is clear. In all the other cases, the pyramid is always upright in nature, because higher we go, lower will be the energy, higher we go, lower will be the number, higher we go, lower will be the biomass in usual cases. In certain exceptional cases like aquatic ecosystem, the pyramid of biomass only will be inverted in nature, where higher we go, higher will be the biomass. This is how we explain the entire system of food chain, food web, and representing them graphically based on their ecosystem through ecological pyramids and focusing on energy, number, and biomass. I hope the idea of ecosystem and its major functions are very much clear. Now we move on to the final functional aspect of ecosystem, that is biogeochemical cycle. Now moving on to the last and the final function of ecosystem, that is biogeochemical cycle. Now, when we talk about biogeochemical cycle, there are so many different forms of cycles that we have to focus on. First among them is the hydrological cycle, which is the water cycle, and then we have gaseous cycle, and finally we have the sedimentary cycles. Now hydrological cycles are also called as the water cycle, which help in maintaining the amount of water on the earth's surface. The cyclic movement of water in the form of water cycle is what helps life to be regained in the earth. Gaseous cycle include the cyclic movement of gases such as oxygen, nitrogen, carbon dioxide, etc., which are very much required for our daily survival, our breathing, our respiratory processes, and all other life activities that we do. And then the sedimentary cycles, which include cycles of minerals such as sulfur, phosphorus, etc., which forms the mineral component of the soil. Now these three types of cycles constitute the biogeochemical cycles, which again in turn helps in the movement of nutrients, gases as well as water between biotic and abiotic components and maintain equilibrium of life on earth. So when we focus on the functions of ecosystem, we have to remember energy flow, photosynthesis, producers, consumers, decomposers, food chain, how the process of energy is being transferred from one organism to the other by eating and being eaten, the graphical representation of food chain and food web through ecological pyramids, and then biogeochemical cycle. When we are talking about biogeochemical cycle, these three aspects are very much predominant because without water, without air or different types of gases and the minerals, life cannot exist. So all these four major functions complete the entire process of ecosystem, its structure and its functional aspect. Now to conclude, I would like to say that ecosystem is the structural and functional unit of an environment because it is that part of an environment where life coexists because of its interaction with its surroundings. And this interaction, when studied as a different branch of science called ecology, it is very much evident that we need to give importance to ecological balance, ecosystem balance, and proper interaction between biotic and abiotic components for life to survive in the present and future in a peaceful way. So, one thing that we all need to remember is ecosystem is very much functional and it will help life to sustain on earth only with the cooperation of human beings. We need to protect ecosystems, we need to protect environment for life to maintain in this phase of earth for years to come. By this, I conclude the topic where we have covered the structure and functions of the ecosystem. We started with the introduction, we continued through the structure, the functions and various possible aspects that helps in the survival as well as the interaction of biotic and abiotic components in an ecosystem. I hope the concepts are clear and I hope you will be able to learn these topics very well because these are very, very vital not only from syllabus point of view but for survival of life point of view. This is Remya Madan Gopal signing off for the day. Thank you.